Good afternoon. My name is Tim Unwin. I'm UNESCO Chair in ICT for D at Royal Holloway, University of London, and on the Programme Committee for PCF5. One of the nice things about being on the committee is one can have fantastic people to come and give keynote addresses. So it's with great pleasure we welcome Astrid Dufborg here to give the keynote address this afternoon. And Astrid, I was just wondering if you could begin by telling us a little bit about your background and why you are fired up by ICT for education.
Well, actually, that's a long story in a way, and I'll try to make it short here. I have been working on development issues as part of a bilateral donor agency for some 30 years.
And that was Swedish SIDA?
That was Swedish SIDA. We did come across not really ICTs, because at that time I worked within education areas. I have been living in several African countries. We did use ICTs in the programs, but we never sort of called it that. I was also then at some level involved in the commercialization of the telecoms area, which also was a kind of a movement taking place quite some years ago by now. Eventually, I was heading a department for infrastructure and economic cooperation, and at SIDA, and the issues around ICT started to pop up, you know, on the donor agendas.
This was the late 90s, early 2000s?
Yes, this was actually until, yes, really, but up to 2000, really, I would say. I eventually got the chance to move to Geneva, and I was ending up at the Swedish delegation to the UN, and in charge of Sweden's participation in the World Summit of the Information Society. I'm probably one of those who actually have sat through
all of the sessions.
All sessions from the very beginning to the very end, and that was a very, very interesting experience, particularly because it actually told me that a lot of things which were discussed were not really about technology, they were about development. Mm-hmm. So that somehow brought together my development background and the issues we had been somehow discussing in education, in infrastructure, with the issues about the information society. Mm-hmm. I was also, in parallel to my work in Geneva, I was a member representing Sweden again in the United Nations ICT Task Force, mm-hmm. which was set up in 2000. Effectively worked between 2001 and 2005. Mm-hmm. In that process we started to identify where the real gaps were in addressing the digital divide, and of course there was a debate about whether there was a digital divide or what it would be called, but found really that one of the key areas really, the gaps existing that needed attention was the education area, because in whichever way one looks at it, at sort of ICT for development and really using the technology for development, I mean, one cannot somehow bypass the education area. So my Irish colleague and I really promoted that the task force would be engaged in, and eventually that led to the formation of GESI, which is the Global E-Schools and Communities Initiative. And we had it already, because the task force was a kind of collaboration between governments and private sector and non-governmental organizations. We had actually quite a lot of assistance from particularly McKinsey, who did a lot of studies in different countries and looking at the gaps, and really came back with a full-fledged feasibility study and confirming that yes, the education area was critical and needed attention. The potential was there, but not really the found out the ways of actually how to incorporate that and to improve education from that point of view.
So you've been involved in this for a considerable length of time, and I remember 8 years ago, I think, talking with an African country and the government there about ambitions that it had, and we seem very often not to be making the progress, because I'm going back to that country in a couple of weeks' time and having exactly the same conversation again. In your length of experience, would you agree that we're perhaps not making as much progress as we could make? And I mean, it's not easy to answer this, but are there areas where you think, you know, 2 or 3 key things that in using ICT for education, particularly in the context of open and distance learning, that you know, things that we need to get right that we're still not getting right to enable us actually to make the sort of progress that we're all aspiring to?